Greetings and welcome once again to LegalizeFreedom.com. I'm your host, Greg Moffitt, and today I'd like to present the latest episode of my TV and movie review series, Hauntology and Dystopia. As per usual, there's two items for our consideration today. First up is the TV series, The Nightmare Man. That's from 1981. Second, we have another TV series, Tripods, two series of that, 1984, 1985. So turning first of all to The Nightmare Man, say this was a BBC TV series broadcast in 1981. It was based on a 1978 novel called Child of Vodyanoi. Now, I'm not quite sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a Russian word, may indeed be a place name if I remember correctly. This is a mini-series over several episodes. And I'm rather fond of mini-series that are like one self-encapsulated story taking place ideally over subsequent nights. It's a way of, I think, building tension and allowing a longer story arc to be explored. The totality of the mini-series, much shorter than many TV series, most TV series, but much more scope temporally than most movies. So both the script writer and the director of The Nightmare Man also worked on Doctor Who, so they're coming to The Nightmare Man with that wonderful pedigree. Now, the story takes place on a remote Scottish island, although it was filmed elsewhere. And two things sprung to mind about that straight away. One was that as I begin to explain the narrative, you'll see why I drew parallels with The Thing, but it's about people geographically isolated and being menaced by a threat that is at first completely unknown, the nature of it, and having to deal with that in that pressure cooker type environment. The second was that for various reasons, there's profound hauntological atmospheres and dimensions to the location. And by the way, the series was all shot on location. There's no studio work, and it was done on video. This was quite pioneering at the time, on video as opposed to film, if you follow. But also throughout the duration of the story, the island is enveloped in fog, and this, as I say, lends a very evocative atmosphere to proceedings. There's definitely a feeling of the uncanny about it all. Now, as the story unfolds, basically there's two major threads to this. One is a series of savage murders, savage killings that take place on the island. Again, you can imagine a small island, not a large population at all. So everybody knows everybody, a little bit like, the Antarctic research station in The Thing. And also there's a discovery of a strange vessel on the beach, one of the beaches of the island, some sort of seagoing vessel, which looks completely alien. No one has any idea what it is. It's seemingly abandoned. But these two things are, of course, linked. Our main protagonists, or some of the main protagonists in the story, are the local dentist, who's not from the area. He's English. The local pharmacist, she is native to the island, and the dentist is actually in love with her. That's kind of by the by. There's the local police chief. Again, he's from Glasgow, I think, but some big city. And he's, you would think, got the easy life as he winds down to retirement policing this little island. And then there's a military man, a top military man, who arrives near the start of the series, arrives on the island ostensibly on a holiday, but he begins to take a sort of intense and, to be honest with you, suspicious interest in the people and the goings-on on the island. So one of the first signs of that there's something up here is a dismembered body is discovered on the local golf course. And of course, police go in to investigate, and our military man takes, as I say, a deep interest in all of this, and he's interfering, to be quite honest with you. There are also, I mean, the dismemberment leads them to think, first of all, this is the work of a wild animal. Okay. Does that turn out to be the case? Well, we'll follow the story. But they also begin to detect abnormally high levels of radiation in various places on the island, particularly around where they're finding these bodies, as it turns out to be bodies, plural. A local team on the island who are stationed there, who happen to have scientific equipment amongst them, as a Geiger counter, and they notice this thing being triggered. So what's all this about? A mysterious, savage dismemberment of a human, high radiation levels, strange craft found on the beach. Now, this what appeared to be, one-off killing turns into a bit of a killing spree. And as the story moves on, we see this being done through point of view camera, as it were. So from the point of view of the whoever is carrying out these killings. And it's a little bit like sort of Halloween, Michael Myers type thing. You hear this rabid, heavy breathing and this maniacal, beast-like, attack in each case. And there's another incident where they find livestock torn apart, terribly dismembered. And at this point, alien speculation enters the equation. Are we dealing with something, from another world? I mean, even the police sergeant is willing to entertain this speculation. Now, as they're thinking about the origins and motives of the killer and for the killings, the story takes a slightly different turn in the sense of the beginning to explain the origin of all this. A Russian parachute regiment soldier is discovered on the island, and straight away it's like, well, how does this relate to the events here? Does it relate? Because they're a long way out of their sphere of influence. You would imagine Russians turning up on a Scottish island. Then at this point, the military commander, who was having his holiday on the island, suddenly a wave of paratroopers arrive, British paratroopers arrive on the island, and suddenly he finds himself in command for them. He's expecting this all along. So he's in command of this these troops. And he then sets about implementing martial law on the island. And in order to get the situation under control, well, straight away you think, well, hang on a minute here, there's way more going on here than meets the eye. There's a couple of things to say that I was reminded of at this point in the story. One was it has I mentioned the Doctor Who connection before. The Nightmare Man has a strong atmosphere evocative of John Pertwee's Doctor Who episodes where he was exiled on Earth. So they're the ones that they shot Earthbound stories for budgetary reasons. They're the ones that, with the Brigadier and units and whatnot being part of those stories. But this really reminds of that. You've got this on Earth, but this science fiction dimension taking part in a very everyday contemporary world. There's also an underlying current of tension here with technology. Good but the ills, is only beginning to really surface through often as not science fiction in this sort of period, the downside of advanced technology. Now, the truth of the matter, so sort of spoiler alert here if you want to skip forward if you plan on watching this, but it turns out that the Russian paratroopers were here searching for this killer, their man. So this is a Russian special forces, specially trained black ops, black technology soldier who somehow found himself inadvertently washed up on this Scottish island. The craft aforementioned was a small submarine, and the Russians have been developing, again, in secret, a program where these troops, specially selected, specially trained, are cybernetically connected to the sub. There's a mind merge. So the machine that is the sub, the latest technology, unlike anything any military's ever seen, is at one with the pilot. And he's connected by a cable inserted into, by a series of operations into his neck, into his cerebral cortex, and that connects with a flow back and forth of information with the sub. But this is of course, the program being what it is, we know how military, secret military programs getting out of control. That's what this turns out to be. And he's gone rogue. And this is one of the side effects they suddenly discovered of this program. And he's become a homicidal maniac, and he's killing people on the island. The Russians were there to try and get him back. The British are there to try and capture and again learn what they can from this operative or from this equipment. And also they discover, of course, there's many more of these operatives. So there's a whole army of these mind merge soldier subs, which are going to be like the future of warfare, so the Russians hope. Like the Earthbound Doctor Who series, there's a great tension here between military men and men of science, and indeed the ordinary people. They find themselves sort of caught in between this. So it's the differing priorities of science and the military that we see playing out here. So, and as well as evoking Doctor Who, I would say the Nightmare Man also has things in common with the Quatermass stories. So if you're a fan of those, I think you'll find something to enjoy here. Now, this series was never repeated, and it's quite unique. Despite the comparisons that I've made, I've never really seen anything else quite like it. So it was enjoyable to revisit. Now, remarkably, I turned this up when I was doing some research, and it's a book devoted to the series. Not the thickest book in the world, as you imagine, just writing about one miniseries. But I wanted to bring this to your attention, not only because the book exists and it's a fascinating read, but because the publishers of this, Phantom Publishing, that's with an F, I had a bit of a look at their catalogue, and there's so many titles that will be of interest to fans of these genres and what I've been covering in the series. So Nightmare Man book by Phantom Publishing. Okay, so on to our second item for today. We're looking at the series, as mentioned before, Tripods. Two series, broadcast 1984, 1985, aimed at a teenage audience, but as with a lot of these items I cover here, a message to a universal audience, really. Often, I'm going to put it, snuck in under the radar by being ostensibly aimed at teenagers. So the series was based on 3 novels by John Christopher, released in 1967, 1968. John Christopher, also the author of The Death of Grass, which was later turned into the movie No Blade of Grass, and you'll find my review of that in a previous episode. This was another BBC series, and if you've looked at any stills or any footage of this, or indeed the cover of the DVD box set there, there's great similarities here, and superficially at least, with War of the Worlds. But of course, that's true in terms of like the tripod-like machines and alien invasion. But what George Pal did, he was the director of the original classic War of the Worlds. Of course, he turned them into flying machines, didn't he, and introduced them as impervious to atomic bombs. That was his way of getting around the fact that by the time that film got made, compared to H.G. Wells' time, the Martian tripods would have posed, not that much of a threat to a modern Earth military. So the setting of our film is about a century in the future. Now, if we take this to when it was released around 1984, when it first came out, they're looking at about 2084. And there is what turns out to be a post-apocalyptic world, but at first just looks like a medieval sort of serfdom type world, except that there's items of modernity in there. And there's also a number of time periods represented in the way people live and in the technology they have and don't have. And what it turns out is that there's been some kind of takeover, some kind of slow motion apocalypse has taken place on Earth, and it has reverted the human population back to a pre-industrial, as I say, more or less agrarian existence, with a few little, say, roommate bits of tech left over from what would previously have been the modern era. So you're looking at this all begins for our protagonists in the early 80s. And by the time the story's unfolding as we see it, a lot of people don't even remember what it was that changed. They just know that there was a big upheaval. And this is common in actual Earth history and the human story. Now, the original idea put across, because it's believed by some of the elders in the society, is that the tripods were actually a manifestation of AI, of artificial intelligence, which sensed the danger that the human race posed to themselves and to the planet, and so intervened to step people back to a more primitive existence so they wouldn't have that technological global threat that existed. Sound familiar? Well, now, it turns out that's not the case. And what we're looking at here is an actual invasion from creatures from another planet, indeed another galaxy, as it turns out. As often happens in these sorts of stories, there are collaborators, or those people who are recruited by the invaders to work for them as a way of controlling the oppressed population, the occupied population, the subjugated people. In this case, there's a social strata of humans called the Black Guards, and these are the enforcers, because although we see the tripods moving around in the series, there's not very many of them, and it turns out that they are, after all, as in War of the Worlds, it turns out that they're machines, that it's what's inside them that has created them and is enforcing this takeover of the planet. Now, you might be thinking, okay, well, where's the human resistance? Well, here's the key. All humans in this, as I say, neo-feudal, agrarian hellscape of the future are, come age 16, they are given an implant. It's basically a form of brain implant. It's called a cap in the series, and this removes them from them any curiosity or creativity, and subsumes them into a sort of collective for the greater good, as it were. So all impulse to rebel, to fight back, to ask questions like why are we doing this? Why is this being done to us? What is it to be free? All those questions just go away. So, and you can see why that's necessary from the tripods or whatever is controlling them from their point of view. So it's a little bit like in the TV series, the Prisoner, it's like questions. I can't remember the exact phrase, but questions are a menace and answers are a burden to the mind, something like that. It's that you're better not knowing. The other analogy would be in the Matrix, the guy who sells out the crew aboard the ship who are outside the Matrix. He requests to be subsumed back into the Matrix, so he just doesn't know what's going on. So he's living his own form of a drugged or capped existence. No more questions, no more knowledge of the situation that you're actually in. Now, in the story, you do have a resistance of sort, but they are obviously uncapped. And there's a few people who've managed to avoid this, and this is where it comes in. So the young people in our story who are the main protagonists, they're at that point where they're about to be capped, they're asking questions, and in order to avoid being capped, they have to leave home. And they hear from people called vagrants, who are either mostly people who have not been capped or have managed to somehow get rid of their cap, more of that in the story. The vagrants who wander the countryside tell them there is a resistance somewhere, and it's a place in the White Mountains in the south of what is France. But even having a map of the world or being able to travel, as you might imagine, is very difficult. So our protagonists decide to make their way there, discover the resistance, and link up with them. One commenter on this series said recently, well, this prepares the mind very nicely, doesn't it, for net zero, with this reduced material existence, no ability or even desire to travel or know other places as people. Just stay where you are, be happy with your lot, and don't ask any questions. Now, along with various adventures along the way, our heroes do get to find the home of the resistance, and they find out that the tripods are their occupants, are based in a domed city that they've constructed. And it turns out they need this in order to live, because outside of the tripods or outside of this domed city, the atmosphere and the gravitational and other conditions on Earth are not suitable for them. And this turns out to be part of their nefarious plan. But in order to recruit people to serve them in the city, these aliens, which turn out to be called masters, they hold like games, a bit like the Olympic Games. Once a year, young people come in from outside, compete in the games, and those who win get the privilege, the dubious privilege of serving the masters in the domed city. The City of Gold, it's actually called. And one of the things that was quite remarkable at the time this came out, say 84, 85, although I think John Christopher's books in the 60s would have described this, but the aliens turn out to be non-humanoid. So they're not, as was so often, with torso, arms, legs, a head, eyes, ears, nose, mouth, all the rest of it, completely non-humanoid. Interesting in itself. Now, it turns out that the masters are not really the masters. They're part of a hierarchy, and a hierarchy that not only ascends in terms of intelligence and importance, but actually in corporeality. So above the masters are actually cognoscs, who are just a kind of just an intelligence, a non-material intelligence, and the source of their intelligence and power is a form of pure consciousness that has no material existence whatsoever. So that's a really interesting dimension to the story that you don't often see explored in most sci-fi, where it's something like, aliens or whatever it happens to be, that it's space opera or space battles, and most things, no matter how alien they are somehow recognizable as life forms. Now, it turns out that the Master's actual plan is to terraform the planet so it's suitable for them. It seems to be moving from planet to planet, doing this over long periods of time. And unfortunately, what will happen here is that will make Earth unsuitable for human life. So their plan is to take over the planet, terraform it for their own use, and that will result in the extinction of all human life and probably all indigenous life on Earth. So our protagonists travel to the city. They learn about all of this. Then they have to learn what they're there for. Actually, is to infiltrate. So they're in with all the other captain individuals, try to infiltrate and find out if these creatures have any weaknesses and then how to exploit them. Take that news back to the Resistance, which towards the end of the series they do. However, when they arrive back at the mountain base of the Resistance, they find out that it's been completely destroyed and is deserted. So at this point, it's all up in the air, the question of what to do next. Now, I said there were 2 series of tripods, 3 books by John Christopher. Each series was based on one of the books, so that meant that book 3 never got filmed. BBC were disappointed with the ratings as it went on, so they cancelled the 3rd one. Now, this makes the whole thing, the whole experience of watching the tripods, kind of unsatisfactory, because even myself, knowing this, by the time I was getting to the end of series 2, I was thinking, well, they've got a lot to pack in the next couple of episodes. And of course, I realized, well, there is no series 3, so the story is left hanging. Some things that we can say about the 3rd series is that the protagonists our heroes, get back into the city. They've got the key weakness of the masters, which they exploit. And that is that even the slightest, how human is this? Never mind the cold and flu in War of the Worlds. The masters are completely paralyzed, allergic to even the slightest quantity of alcohol. So they lace the whole city's water system with booze. That renders the masters stupefied, unconscious. And while they're in that state, they crack a hole in the dome. The whole thing is destroyed, and the gravitational conditions, atmospheric conditions inside Nesri, the masters, goes away. Other masters in other craft subsequently arrive in Earth orbit. They see what's happened and they turn away. They decide not to bother with this restive, troublemaking, warlike creatures on this planet, Earth. Now, as far as ratings falling, and as much as I'd like to have seen Series 3, the series is criticized for its slow pace at times. And what I would say to that is that they would have been better not having 13 episodes per series, but maybe having 8 or even 6, tighten it all up, stick more closely to the books. What there is of it, I enjoyed, particularly series 1. Series 2 introduced more effects, but bear in mind this was 1985, and if you think what was achieved, albeit on a vast budget, with things like Star Wars, but even Doctor Who in the early 80s was coming up with special effects far superior to this. Some of the special effects for 1985 in Series 2 of Tripods are laughably bad, unfortunately. You have to really exercise your suspension of disbelief to go along with it. But all in all, I found a strong message in all of this. So many parallels with events today and where the world, the direction of travel that we're heading in, but both good and bad. It says a lot about human nature. It shows, how we can be corrupted and debased, and how we'll go along with narratives for the sake of going along. How quickly we can be sucked into groupthink and mass formation psychosis. But also, there's that spirit within us, that resistance, that fight. That man's humanity to man as well as man's inhumanity to man. That is a thing. And so, yeah, that's about it for today. Both these series worth checking out with the caveats for the tripods I mentioned. So today, just a reminder, let's put the Nightmare Man book away. The Nightmare Man, 1981 TV miniseries, and Tripods, series 1 and 2, the only extant ones. 1984 and 1985. So that's all for today. Until next time, I'm Greg Moffitt, and you've been watching LegalizeFreedom.com.
LegalizeFreedom.com